So my son Matthew got a couple of little new additions. There's one of them in there, the other one's this enclosure is already getting to be a bit small for them. So we've decided to upgrade their enclosure. What we've found is a large, I think it must have been an old stereo cabinet because it had shelving in it. We're putting it horizontally, it's going to be mounted on the wall, but it was set up in a vertical position at one stage. So all we've done at this stage is reinforce the box by putting some framing on the top and bottom of it, and adding some framing to the inside of it to make it a lot more sturdy. The back of the box is just a 3mm board. You can see there by the hole it's not very thick. So what we're going to do is add some fake rock enclosure on the inside of this to actually build up the strength of it and give the little guy somewhere to run around and crawl through. So we've just started breaking up some foam and roughly putting it in place just to get a feel for what we want to do. There's no real rules associated with this. To give you an idea, we're going to incorporate a little column into it somewhere, and it's just really a matter these and then breaking away whatever edges we like to sort of get an interesting sort of shaped piece, okay, and then starting to incorporate that, and that can be set on different angles. So we've glued the corner bits in there, and we've just done a temporary sort of column arrangement to get a bit of a feel for the extra stuff that we want to do. Before we attach that column though, we need to carve out that corner a little bit better. So I generally just want to break it up a little bit, but also leave it so that it has sort of that rock strata sort of look to it, and just has a little bit more sort of broken up surface. So once we've vacuumed up the bulk of the little leftover pieces, I'm just going to use a little flamethrower type lighter to go through and further just refine those edges. Keep in mind this is all going to be coated as well, so it's all about building up layers, similar to what I did with the Terminator rocks. So that stiffens the surface of the foam back up and takes away all those sort of blurry edges so that this bit's not sort of flaking off it anymore. We're using a water-based stud adhesive as the glue. We're just putting a nice thin layer in between each piece of foam. You can't put on too much of this stuff because it's water-based, and with the foam, if you put it on too thick a layer, the glue just doesn't set. Just apply it to the base, and then same story again, thin layer between each one. Build it up until you have the style of thing that you're after. So to give a bit more structural support to the overhanging areas and the bridge areas, I'm just hammering a bit of stainless steel rod that's going through the foam, and that just takes a bit of the flex out of it. It'll still flex, but there's no chance now that the foam can break. So now that we've got the basic sort of substructure pieces in place, we're going to tape off that hole so that stuff doesn't get out, and then move on to the expanding foam so that we can start sculpting up a bit more detail. Now, the expanding foam can be just blobbed out and it'll fluff up, or you can use it as a texture type coating, whereas if you smear it like that, it still continues to expand and it gives texture to the surface that you're working on, and this will make it a much rockier, sort of broken up sort of ground area. So in some places I've put the expanding foam and let it expand. In other places I've put it out and let it sort of spread out. I'll keep an eye on it now as it does its thing to actually work out where I want to actually collapse it a little bit, or I want it to hang and sort of make sort of interesting sort of pieces. But for the most part, that's the process. Again, there's no real rhyme or reason or rule to it. It's just a matter of what you think looks good. And as it starts to set, it locks into place. And with the final paint and effect, it should look really good. Now that the foam is all set and hardened, we've positioned it on the wall roughly where it's going to be. I've got a little level there to make sure that it's nice and plumb. So now that it's been secured to the wall, I've used 4 of the large Steiner bolts up the top and 3 down the bottom, which is probably overkill for something this size, but we're going to be adding some sand to the interior of it, so it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to the strength of it on the wall. I've got some leftover grout. There's 2 different colours in there, but that's not going to make any difference for the sake of what we're doing. There's probably about 5 teacups in quantity of the grout. I'm going to use about 4 of sand, and again I'm just eyeballing it roughly, so slightly less than the grout in sand. And then I'm going to use just regular plaster of Paris to add to this, and 2 good handfuls of that. The grout sets quite slowly. The regular plaster of Paris will speed up the setting process, so it'll set a bit quicker. The final thing that I'm putting in that is a good quantity of tint, in a brown, dark brown tint. Okay, and a bit of black tint as well. These are just regular house paint tints, but obviously all these ingredients are non-toxic as well, so just using up a bit more of that brown with a bit of water just so it goes a bit further. We need to mix this to like a really thick paint consistency, somewhere between the actual paint and plaster. It needs to be a little bit runny so that we can apply it. This is just a base colour that I'm using. The final paint details that we put across the surface will bring out the highlights and lowlights and make the rock look more like rock. That's the sort of consistency I'm going for. I'm just going to start placing it inside and over the bits that we want. Let that sort of lava down, and then use the paintbrushes to start moving it around to cover up the entire surfaces, make sure there's no gaps. So it's really just a matter of brushing it in, trying to get it all into the little nooks and crannies, building it up in thick and thin areas. It doesn't really matter so much, as long as it just completely covers the surface and doesn't really leave any of the foam exposed. We've just mixed up a second batch of plaster and sand. This time we've used a little bit of a lighter colour to start bringing out the contrast. We'll do a lot more detailing when we get around to the painting stage. So essentially all we've done is try and cover up most of the surface areas, and in particular any of the areas where the foam itself was exposed. So we could very easily just say that that's finished. It's more than good enough now that you could put some sand in there and leave it completely as is, and they'd be quite happy to run around. But for the sake of some aesthetics, we're just going to add a little bit more colour highlights, a little bit of moss on the rocks, and then we've got some little artificial plants that we'll place in there and sort of make it a bit of a nicer environment for them. So the way that I'm going to make up the artificial moss is I've got some green paint with a very small amount of black in that, and then a darkened green almost down to a black. I've got some PVA wood glue, which is an exterior grade version, again still non-toxic. I'm going to add that to these paints so that they harden up a bit more, and we're going to add some sand to the paint to give it a little bit more texture as well. So a good blob in each, handful or so of sand. One a little less in that one because I want it a bit runnier. You can see how that goes to that, almost like the grout, and the PVA glue will help that bond together when it sets. So a bit in there, sort of place it roughly where I want it to be. Break it up with the brush. Same sort of story. Just in the sort of areas that might be a bit sort of dampened or whatever. Putting a really thick coat, but it's very, very thin in terms of the liquidness of the top there for this final bit. Just going to keep on doing that until it comes down to the consistency that I want it to be. This is just a regular paint, which is quite a bright green, so I'm just going to give it a couple of good blobs. And then the water should sort of break it up into like almost like a viney sort of effect. So there you go, it's all finished up now. Sand's been placed in the bottom, artificial plants have been placed in. We've got a UV light up the top and a basking infrared light in the corner there for them. And it just gives them a bigger environment to run around in. If you've been enjoying these videos, don't forget to like and share them, that helps me out a lot. And feel free to subscribe if you want to keep up to date on new videos coming out. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks for watching, talk to you next time.